There are some very specific areas where we can do job growth, and we must do job growth for Connecticut and the future of our country. The first is green technology. Right now, 70% of all the products and components that go into green energy systems come from abroad. That is a disgrace. We ought to be making those products here in America and in Connecticut. And we can foster that kind of production through clean energy zones modeled on the business empowerment zones that have been very successful, providing those incentives through property taxes and other kinds of credits that enable businesses to use those zones, and through renewable integration credits that go to new energy facilities that combine renewable and natural gas sources of power, and energy efficiency home improvement credits. Those kinds of very specific proposals ought to be adopted and pushed by Washington, but right now we have an agency in Washington, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that actually has policies that discourage lower energy prices. And I would promise to you that I clean house at that agency and change energy policy in Washington, D.C., which right now actually makes Connecticut the highest energy, electricity rate charging state in the whole continental United States, which is bad for business as well as consumers. And then I think also health IT. The federal government has $20 billion that will be devoted to health IT, essentially for making our healthcare system more accountable, more accurate, less costly. And Connecticut should be a part of it. And third, biotech. You know, we have in effect, a New Haven corridor for biotech. Yale is expanding its facilities to West Haven. Same could be true of Hartford if we seize this opportunity to use the facilities that exist now and expand them and fight for more government aid. Connecticut deserves its fair share in those very specific three areas. And there's one other area that I think is sort of the elephant in the room, and that is we can develop this new technology, new R&D, but if it's pirated by other countries like the Chinese, it will be used for their benefit, not ours. And we've talked a lot about the failures of this country, but one of the areas that we need to address is the Chinese currency, which right now is overvalued as a result of currency manipulation by that country. I've been with small manufacturers around the state of Connecticut who will be essential to new technology in every one of these areas. You think of the big companies like UTC, which are great companies, but there are also many, many small manufacturers who are victims of the export subsidies of the Chinese, and we ought to declare China a currency manipulator and take appropriate sanctions if necessary. And that kind of enforcement of the law, I will fight to achieve in Washington, D.C.
Anybody else? Merrick?
I think one of the things that we need to address as we're talking about these small businesses, whether they're related to energy or any other component of our economy, one of the things we need to look at is, again, to say that as a state, it's a failing business. And obviously, we've not done this right. Got 173,000 people out of work this morning. We have a situation that obviously hasn't been addressed. And when you look at this, one of the fundamental problems, in my view, at a state level and at a federal level, is that we have been very reactive and not proactive. Now, if you look at why we're harming small business, why we're struggling to create jobs in this state, when 73% of our businesses out there are small business, 9 employees or less, and that's our future. So what are we doing right now that's broken in that process? What are we doing to harm small business? And if you look, there's a great example recently. One of the ways that I've turned business around is to go in and look at what we're spending, what money we're wasting. I'm sure you've done the same in your businesses. Recently, you and I just got dinged for $18 million. So our business here in Connecticut, with 173,000 people unemployed, just got handed a bill for $18 million. But it's worse than that, because in getting that bill for $18 million, we also continued this reputation of being anti-business. What happened in that situation was called Computers Plus Center. It's a small business in Marlboro. The Attorney General sued that business. And in the countersuit, an $18 million verdict was just handed to Gina, the woman that owns that small business, because that lawsuit violated her civil rights and put that business out of business. So when we want to look at why we've got a broken process, let's not sit here and engage in happy talk. It didn't fall out of the sky. That is a small business that was destroyed consciously, deliberately, and intentionally. And that is our reputation. I'll finish my answer on this by saying, what was it that Hartford's most famous resident, Mark Twain, once said? To a man with a new hammer, a lot of things look like nails in need of pounding. I don't think everything needs to be pounded with litigation.
Yes, I realize that I'm commenting on my own answer, but I feel I owe an apology to Monica, wherever you are, for sounding like her, if I did. But very seriously, first of all, just to correct a misstatement that has been made, the taxpayers of Connecticut have not paid a dime in the case involving Malpanis. In fact, that case is under reconsideration because essential evidence, in our view, was excluded from the proceeding, and the state of Connecticut has a right of appeal because, in our view, very serious errors were made in that trial, as sometimes happens in trials, as I know well, because I argued and won a case in the United States Supreme Court on preserving our sex offender registry after two lower courts, the United States Court of Appeals and the trial court here, ruled against my office. And I'm proud of that victory, as I will be if we're able to win that case. And so, as Mark Twain also said, reports of its demise are exaggerated. Let me say about law enforcement. You know, my job has been to enforce the law. What I'm hearing from this table is a philosophy of law enforcement that Bernie Madoff would love. We've just come through a period when lack of enforcement by the federal government enabled and encouraged one of the greatest economic catastrophes in our nation's history. The failure to enforce laws by our federal agencies, despite warnings from attorneys general about laxity of enforcement, led to excessive risk-taking with other people's money, lack of transparency in derivatives, practices that have caused shame to Wall Street itself. And, you know, when the President of the United States talks about unemployment in this country, he doesn't say, well, you know, it's really the fault of our United States Attorney General for enforcing the law. To blame law enforcement for unemployment is beyond wrong. It's silly and shouldn't be given any credibility. In fact, it's a disservice to public service itself and to the hardworking, law-abiding business people who constitute 99.9999 and go on of our business people in the state of Connecticut and the country. They not only follow the law, they welcome the level playing field that strong law enforcement provides to every one of them because they don't want to be outcompeted and underbid by lawbreakers who save costs on the backs of our consumers or our hardworking men and women.